Hello and welcome to Linden Tree Flowers Christmas DIY wreath kit tutorial video. The contents of your kit are as follows. We have a 12-inch wire wreath frame, a bag of moss, real wire, then we have our green floristry wires, we have dried orange apple slices and dried apple slices, pine cones, 3 bundles of cinnamon that are already wired, and lastly your bow. There are 3 stages in this video which I'm going to go through with you of how you need to make your wreath, and this is what you will have at the end of stage 1. This is your mossed wreath. This is what you will end up with at stage 2 once you've added all of your greenery. Of course yours might look different depending on which greenery you've used, but that is stage 2, adding the greenery to your mossed wreath. And this is what you will end up with after stage 3, which is adding the decorations. This or something very similar. Obviously everyone's designs will be different. That's what's lovely about this. Even when we do it in our workshops, everyone has all the same materials, but everyone comes away with something different. So you'll have these materials that I've used here, but you can arrange them in any way you like, and you will end up with your own unique wreath. And you might not believe me now, but I promise you, you will end up with something very similar to this at the end of the video. For the first stage of making your wreath, you are going to need your wire wreath frame, your bag of moss and your real wire. The very first thing that we need to do is attach our real wire onto our wreath frame. So we're going to do that really simply by taking the end of our real wire, feeding it around the wreath frame, pinching it there and then giving it a couple of twists just so it secures it in place. Next we're going to be adding our moss onto our wire base. So the reason why we use moss is because it holds that moisture and that helps all of the foliage that you're going to put onto your wreath last throughout the Christmas season. If it has dried out a little bit in transit before the kit reaches you, or if you've bought it a little bit before you're going to be using it, you can just simply wet it again, sprinkle it with a little bit of water, or use a spray bottle just to moisten that up so it's got the moisture in it. So then simply take a handful of your moss, scrunch it around your wreath frame, and then bind it around with your real wire, which is already attached. You probably want to do it 2 or 3 times just to make sure it's secure. I find it easiest to keep the wreath flat on the surface that you're working on and pass that wire over and under. And you're just going to repeat that technique each time, grabbing a nice big handful, squeezing it around the base and pulling nice and tight as you go, 2 or 3 times around each handful, just to make sure that is all secure on your base. And just keep going until you've covered your whole base. And the last thing we need to do in this first mossing stage is just secure off that wire and make sure it's all complete and all secure. So what you want to do is reel your wire off a little bit, leave a nice length about that long and give it a snip, and then take your real wire, roll off another nice long length. It doesn't really matter how long it is, just make it plenty long so that you can join the ends up. and then feed that underneath. So you're taking that separate piece of wire, feed it underneath the wire frame where you've got your moss, and then bring all three of those ends together, pinch, and then give your wreath a twist, still holding those all three wires together at the end, and that should just secure them all off. Once that's done, drop it there, and then push all of those wire ends back into your wreath, back into the moss, so that it's not going to scratch your door or hurt your hand while you're doing your next stage. And that's it. That is your moss stage complete. If you have bought our foliage bundle to go with your wreath kit, then this is the contents of that bundle. So I'm just going to go through that now. If you haven't bought the bundle from us, then obviously you can use any greenery that you have. I'm just going to go through this quickly as a bit of a guide to what you might want to source from elsewhere if you haven't bought it from us. So you'll have 2 large stems of the blue spruce or Christmas tree foliage. There's 2 to 3 stems of this lovely Cinerea eucalyptus, depending on the size of them. There might be 2 or there might be 3. And we've got this lovely lime green cupressus and the natural birch twigs. Again, there might be 2, there might be 3, depending on how large they are. When you're ready to move on to this next stage of adding your foliage to your mossed wreath, the easiest thing to do is prepare all of your foliage first. So as I said, you might have the bundle from us, or you might have sourced your greenery from elsewhere, you might have got it from your own garden. So depending on what you're using, they are going to be slightly different techniques in how to prepare it, but you can get the gist of it from what we're using here. So you want to cut each of the individual pieces probably roughly that size. So that's about the size of my hand. You don't really want anything too much bigger than that. And with this spruce, you can see the sort of natural bits where that lends itself to being chopped. Get all the small bits as well, because they'll help to fill it in. And I find it easiest to do all of this first before you start, and then you can just start binding everything in place. So just cutting those into those nice little portions. Same with your eucalyptus. So you want to cut this down into different sections so you can use it throughout your wreath. All of these foliages are fairly thin stems, so you should be able to just use normal scissors. As you can see, I'm sporting a little bit of an injury and I'm managing fine with these normal scissors, so it's not like they're big branches. If you've got something bigger from your garden, you might want to use some secateurs. It might be easier. Then we've got the same with the cupressus, cutting it down into those nice little sections. So it's roughly the size of my hand as a guide. You can make it longer if you want a more sort of wild, bushy look at the end. Once you've seen the finished article, you can sort of decide how you might want them to differ. Again, using all of those little bits. Don't want any to go to waste. We'll use them all up. And then finally we've got our birch. So again, cutting those into nice smaller portions. You might want to leave them slightly longer. And again, using up everything that you have. So everything's sort of roughly the same size. Cut them all down first, leave them in a bundle, and then we can start attaching it to our wreath. So once all of your foliage is prepared, you're ready to go on to this second stage. So we're going to need to attach our real wire to our moss base again. Doing that just like we did at the beginning before the moss was on there. Just fold it around, get the end to meet itself on its way round, pinch it there, and then give the wreath a couple of twists just to secure it in place. And then that's ready to go. And we're going to use exactly the same technique to get our foliage on as we did to get our moss on, and that's just binding it over. So again, I find it easiest to leave the wreath flat on the surface that you're working on and pass the wire over and under. So take your first bit of foliage that you're going to attach, and what you want to do is lay it flat on top of the wreath. Then with your reel wire, just pass that over at this stem end, so you're not going to flatten this nice shape that you've got from the foliage at this end. Pass that over and under, pulling it nice and tight, just like we did at the mossing stage, a couple of times for each piece. And what we're going to do is layer these different types of greenery that we're using. So take your next piece. You might be wanting to just use all one thing, in which case you just carry on with that. But I'll show you with this technique and hopefully you can adapt it to whatever you're using at home. Lay that then on top, and again making sure you're going over this stem end so you're not flattening the shape that you've got at the nice bushy end. Lay that on top so it's a little bit recessed back, and again just bind over a couple of times. You might want to use a particular pattern, so one piece of this, one piece of that. Just do whatever you think is best, whatever you like. As you position the bits, especially with this spruce, you want to be sort of placing some facing that way and some facing that way, just so you're covering all of that moss base. But the most important thing is to keep moving in the same direction. So each time you're laying your next piece of foliage over the last, covering the stem end, so you're almost like you're working backwards on yourself, and then pulling that nice and tight as you go. The twigs work really nicely to give it just that different texture, different colour. You might want to leave these a little bit longer so that they've got a little bit more of a wild finish. And it's exactly the same technique. Lay it on top, binding over that stem end. Same with your eucalyptus. So I'm going to be doing quite an even pattern using the same materials throughout the whole wreath and just laying it on top. When you first start out, you might be thinking, oh, it's not looking quite right. There's something about the way that it goes on. It always looks a little bit heavy as you're doing it, but just keep going with it. And as you get to sort of 2/3 round, you'll realise it's all coming together. So just keep going. Keep laying all those materials on, making sure you're covering as much of that moss as you can as you go around. That's why this foliage is so good, because it's really nice and bushy, and of course it smells lovely as well. And just placing each of the different materials as you go. If you angle the twigs out a little bit, that'll just give you a little bit more of a bigger wreath. Same with all of the materials. If you want to make it nice and bushy and full, then just poke them out nice and long. Some other materials that work really nicely, ivy, buried ivy is really lovely at this time of year. That always works well. Of course, the traditional holly, you've got to be a little bit brave because obviously it's prickly and it does hurt. We do use it in our workshops here, but it always comes with a bit of a warning. You might find it easier to wear gardening gloves while you're doing it if you've got sensitive hands, but you particularly really want that holly. Anything really that's going to last a good couple of weeks, even though it's got that moisture from the moss, it's not in water, so you do need to make sure it's something that's fairly hardy. And just keep going around using that same technique until you get to the end. when you get to this end bit, you just need to be careful that you're not going to be squashing down this nice shape that you started off with. So just those last few pieces that you're going to be putting in, just lift those bits up at that area that you started with, and make sure you don't bind those down flat, because then you'll lose this nice shape that you've got around the outside. And just placing those in just as you have been all the way around, but just take care to hold these bits out of the way as you just finish off the circle. Lifting that up. To complete this stage, we just need to finish it off like we did at the end of the mossing stage. So what we're going to do is reel off our wire nice and long, a little bit longer than last time, and then same again. About that long is plenty. And then just like we did before, take that separate piece of wire, feed it underneath your wire, your wreath frame, and then bring that piece up to meet the other two that are on the other side. It's a little bit more difficult now that you've got all the greenery in the place, but just feed it through. Again, taking care not to flatten down these nice edges so you're not losing the shape. And then you should end up with all three pieces of that wire together. And then just as we did before, pinch them all together nice and close to your moss. And then I find it easiest to give the wreath a little spin, and that will pinch all of those three wires together. But then this time, instead of cutting it short, we're going to use this to form the way that we're going to hang our wreath when it's all finished. So simply take those wires, you've got all three together, all twisted nice and tight, loop them back around, pinch it again right at the base, and then twist that quite a few times. Make sure it's really nice and secure, so you've got a hoop. And then you can either use that hoop to directly hang it onto a nail or whatever you're hanging it onto, or if you want to feed a piece of ribbon through or a piece of string, so that then you can use that to then tie it onto something else, you can do. And again, just taking care to cut off those sharp ends, and anything that's sharp, just push it back into the moss so that you haven't got anything that's going to scratch the door. And again, it's not going to hurt your hands. And that is your greenery phase completed. And we're now ready to go on to the final stage, which is adding the decoration to your wreath. So you'll see that these are the items that you've got in your pack for decorating. Of course, you can add your own items as well. If you're adding anything else that needs wiring, then the techniques are pretty similar, so you should be able to transfer those skills onto whatever you are using. So you'll notice the cinnamon sticks are already wired, so we don't need to do anything to prepare those, they're ready to go. And the same with our bow as well, we've already wired that for you here. So that's already got the wire attached, you don't need to do anything, that is ready to go onto your wreath. And these other items, your pine cones, your orange slices and your apple slices, they all just need to be wired. So just like we did at the foliage stage, I find it easiest to prepare everything first, and then you can just go ahead and attach them all once everything's ready to go onto your wreath. So I'm going to show you the technique for wiring each of these individual items, and as I say, if you've got anything else that you're using, hopefully you can use those wires in a similar way to make them so they're easy to attach onto your wreath. I will start by showing you how to wire your pine cones. So take one of these green floristry wires and one pine cone, and then what you want to do is feed this through, so hopefully you can see okay, into the little grooves that you've got around the base of the pine cone, feeding it through as you go, and then meeting those two pieces together, pinch them there and then give it a twist. So that is what you end up with on a nice long wire. I'll do that again just so that you can see hopefully clearly. So just feeding it through the base of that pine cone, as close to the base as you can get. And then meeting it together and giving it a twist. And then just repeating that for all of your pine cones. And next up we've got our dried fruit. So we've got our dried orange slices and dried apple slices. I quite like to do them in little pairs. I think that looks quite nice to have them bunched together there. So the technique is obviously the same for each of them. I'll show you one of each, and obviously you can stop it, pause it, rewind it if you need to, just for clarity. So take one of the green wires again, like we did for our pine cones, and then once you've bunched them together, you're just going to pierce that through. And then bend that round to meet itself there and give it a nice firm twist. As you do it, if you just hold the point where you've put the wire through the orange slices, because sometimes they can be a bit brittle, they can break, so if you just hold that to make sure it's not going to tear through it as you do it. And there you go, you've got two wired together. I'll just show you that again with the apple slices. So again, I'll just bunch them together, pierce it through. As you push it through, if you just hold the wire nice and close to where you're pushing it and apply the pressure there, if you push it from the top, sometimes the wire can bend and then it's quite difficult to get through. So just push it and again hold it in place, bend those bits down together and give it a good twist, a couple of twists. And there, you've got the same. And just repeat that for each of your sets of slices. Now, of course, you can decorate your wreath in any way that you like. I'm just going to do one design here, but however you want to group your items together, however you want to display them is entirely up to you. It's going on your door, so it's your design. It might be helpful to lay the items on to start with, just to get an idea of where you're going to place them, or you might just want to go for it. It's entirely up to you, but I'm just going to show you how each of them is attached with the wire that we've already affixed to the decorations, and then it's up to you however you want to display them. So once you've decided where you want to put your items, the technique is the same for all of them. So take your wire and you're going to be pushing it straight through, all the way through the foliage layer and the moss layer to the other side of the moss to make it nice and secure. So once you've decided where it's going to go, just push it through. Again, like we did when we were putting the wires on the fruit slices, just hold it quite close to the bottom of the wire and push it in, feeding it as you go, rather than pushing it from up here. Again, you'll bend that wire and it might be quite difficult to get through the moss. So feeding it through, nice and slowly. Just be really careful as you push it through. You don't want to stab your hand on the other side. So you should be able to feel it. There it is. Pushing that down so it's in the position that you want it to go. There's still a little bit of give once it's in place. And then with that end, you're just going to hook it over and then push it back in to your moss. And again, that's going to stop it from scratching you or the door, but it's also making that hook, so then that's really nice and secure and it's not going to fall out. If it's on your front door, if it's going to get bashed about a bit, then hopefully everything will stay in place. So that is the basic technique. As I said, how you arrange your items is entirely up to you. I quite like to do little groups, so I might put two of these pine cones together. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to get it through both layers. It might get caught on one of the stems that you've attached. So just wiggle it around and again push it through. Be really careful that your hand's not right there and doesn't get stabbed on the other side. Hook it over and then push it straight back into the moss. And then you can sort of do those finishing touches to just make sure you're happy with how they're attached. If you change your mind, you can just unhook it and pull it back out and move it. So I will just show you, it's exactly the same with all of the items. So once you've decided where you're going to position it, just feed it through nice and carefully, pushing it into place. Again, I'm just doing a nice little group here, but you might want to do a nice little pattern as it goes around. There's no real rules, however you like it. So there you are, your finished door wreath. Hopefully you'll have ended up with something that looks more or less like this. As I say, you might have a slightly different design, you might have used different greenery, you might have added some different materials on there to decorate, but hopefully you'll have something that's completely unique to you and something that you're really proud of as well. I hope you found this video easy to follow. Please do share with us your creations, we'd love to see them. I will put our social media on the screen so you can follow us there, tag us in any pictures that you take. If you've got any questions at all, I'll also put my email address up so you can always email and ask. If you're not quite sure about anything, then hopefully I can help to clarify. But we'd love to see what you've made, so please do share those pictures with us. And I hope you've enjoyed making your very own Christmas door wreath. Thank you.